range of schools and community organisations across the Melbourne Jewish community, promoting engaging, relevant and meaningful Judaism, fulfilling every Jewish mother's dream, I have to say, Dr. and Rabbi. And the title of his speech tonight is Shavuot and Jewish Identity, Ruth's Conversion, a Model for Jewish Identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachelle. That was lovely. And Rabbi Glasman, thank you for inviting me, and really, really happy to be here tonight. And it's wonderful to see so many people turn up to, like you said, Rabbi Glasman, do Tikun Leil in the different circumstances that we now find ourselves in. So as Rachelle was noting, I'd like to speak about conversion as a model for Jewish identity. I really believe that to answer some of the questions Rachelle was posing, we can look to conversion as an idea, what is going on, what is underneath all of this, what is really, really important. With the obvious parallel being that a person who chooses to convert makes the active choice to be a part of the Jewish people, to subscribe to whatever it means to be Jewish. So if we can look under the hood a little bit at conversion, we mean to all of us in a broad sense. So of course, Shavuot is the time when Matan Torah, we receive the Torah. And on that first Shavuot, we say that Hashem gave us the Torah, but more than that, we made an active choice as the collective Jewish people to receive the Torah. By saying Na'aseh v'nishma, we agreed to receive the Torah. And in doing that, we commit to Hashem, to our Judaism, and to each other. And really, that's what Shavuot every single year is meant to be. It's meant to be this collective reliving, re-experiencing of that story, where we make another affirmation, another commitment to our Judaism, the same way as our ancestors did at Sinai. In parallel, the rabbinic understanding is not only did we receive the Torah, not only did we accept the Torah, we actually converted. That was part of what it meant to receive the Torah. And we can sort of see that the parallels between accepting the Torah and converting are really apparent, where there's this commitment to live as a Jew, to follow the rules of the Torah. There's a conscious choice to be a Jew, to live as a Jew, to be treated like a Jew. And really, conversion, emerging from that idea that we all converted at Sinai, becomes one of the core ideas of Shavuot itself. And that manifests through Megillat Ruth, which is the core text around conversion, and also one of the texts, like the text that we will read or engage with and learn on Shavuot itself. And Megillat Ruth is the story of a Moabite princess, Ruth, who eventually converts to Judaism. If we look to Ruth, this archetypical convert, in order to better understand what conversion is, and again, what does it mean to be Jewish? What is this model for Jewish identity that is emergent from Megillat Ruth? Some things are emergent. The first is that in addition to Ruth being a convert, she's actually a lot more. She's the archetypal outsider in a whole lot of different ways. She's a widow, she's a stranger, she's poor, and she also is a convert. And I think being part of all of these marginalized groups that the Torah really asks us to bring into the fold, I think that's really interesting. It often takes someone who's an outsider in order to show us what we find really, really important. It takes someone who's an outsider with that external perspective to look in and to give us a little bit of that perspective around what is this Jewish identity. So I can take a lot from that perspective. Ruth's the key book about conversion. Let's look to the key pasuk in the key book around conversion to see what is this model for Jewish identity that conversion can suggest. So the core pasuk is this one where Ruth says to Naomi, Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law, "Do not make me leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you sleep, I will sleep. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Again, where you go, I go. Where you sleep, I sleep. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. if we're thinking about conversion, I find this pasuk a little bit perplexing. One would expect to see some sort of deep truth that would motivate a person to convert. Some sort of fundamental, I think this is right, I think this is how the way the world works. And you'd expect that to come in parallel with some sort of deep affirmation of faith. And I guess, you know, the example that would come to mind for me would be what happens in Islam when a person wants to convert, where conversion in Islam is really that affirmation of faith. It's the one sentence. That's not what we're getting with this text at all. We're getting something which is quite perplexing. We're getting this, what's important for Ruth is this idea of, I will be like Naomi. It's quite interesting. And the only thing that we're getting which looks like some affirmation of faith, your God, my God, is really kind of fine print. It's buried in the middle of the entire statement. It's not front and center. Really, Ruth is mimetic. She just really wants to be like Naomi. And I think that when we start to unpack that, this pasuk itself is expounded in two different locations. One is in the Midrash and one is in the Gemara. And in both locations, the story becomes even more perplexing, where that phrase, your God, my God, is actually emptied of all meaning. And I'll explain what I mean. So, in both places, this your God, my God, your people, my people, the entire thing is constructed as a conversation between Ruth and Naomi, where the explanations interpolate what Naomi says into Ruth's responses. So what we get is the pasuk says, where you go, I will go. And the explanations explain. Naomi says to Ruth, you can't go to the circuses and the theatres. And the other explanation says, you can't go outside the limits of Tchum Shabbat. You can't go beyond a certain distance on Shabbat. And then Ruth responds, where you go, I go. And again, you can't sleep in a place without a mezuzah. Or you can't contravene the law of yichud, which is about being alone with someone of the opposite sex. And then Ruth responds, where you sleep, I sleep. And again, being part of the Jewish people is about being part of the collective reward and punishment of the Jewish people. You're responsible to keep the 613 commandments. And then Ruth responds, your people are my people. For your God, my God, and here we will see what I mean, that it's emptied of that sort of theological significance. The Midrash explains that Naomi tells Ruth, you are obligated to keep all of the mitzvot. And to that Ruth responds, your God is my God. The Gemara says, you're not allowed to have any other gods. And to that Ruth responds, your God is my God. So really, whatever statement of faith, whatever affirmation of faith has really been sort of emptied from this core statement. The only inclination has been deflated. Rather than focusing on what's missing, I think if we focus on what Ruth is doing in this pasuk, we can really understand the core of conversion and thereby the core of Jewish identity. I think at its core, Jewish identity is about Jewish identification. Jewish identity is about Jewish identification. What does Ruth focus on in this pasuk? She wants to be Jewish, like Naomi. She wants to be like the Jewish Naomi. She wants to think, feel, act like the Jewish Naomi. Jewish identification, I think, is a step zero to being a Jewish person. I think Jewish identification is the step zero of Jewish identity, which is then followed by a step one of all the different Jewish beliefs, rituals, and practices. But the step zero is, I feel Jewish. I want to be part of the Jewish people. And I think a further support for this idea is seen in the Gemara and in the Halacha, which talk about conversion and say that to convert to the Jewish people, you need to convert through a bet din into a community. You can't convert by yourself. If a person chooses to convert and believes all of Jewish theology and practices all of the Jewish laws and rituals, that person does not become Jewish unless and until they join the Jewish people through a bet din. You join Judaism into and through a community. I think that that's what's at the core of what it means to be Jewish. So what does this Jewish identification mean? What am I saying people should identify with? And I think for me, there were two answers to that. The first was this idea of Jewish people and Jewish community. And the second was this idea of a Jewish mission, the Jewish narrative, the Jewish dream. Jewish people and Jewish community, Rav Soloveitchik divides that into two ideas. He says that one is fate, the other is destiny. To be part of the Jewish people means you join the fate of the Jewish people and you join the destiny of the Jewish people. Fate is when we are objects. We are acted on by external forces, not always in the best way. Destiny is when we become the subjects. We become the people who do. That's what it means to be. It means to be doing the things. And then when we turn to what sort of things should we be doing, we can think about the Jewish narrative, the Jewish dream, the Jewish mission. And I think that at the end of the day, that comes back to the Jews are here for a purpose. We're here to do something. We're here to make the world a better place. We believe that there is a God of history and that there is a teleology. There is a direction to history. All of this is going somewhere and it's our job to drive it in that direction. And I think, again, that's what Jewish identification first and foremost is. On Shavuot, on this Friday, that's the step zero that we are reaffirming our allegiance to by accepting the Torah. In the current corona craziness, we've all had a lot of time to focus on who we are and what we identify with. In addition to missing social interactions in the interpersonal realm, it's that broader notion of being part of something bigger that I've been struggling to find new ways to attach to. It's not just walking up and down the street and having a cup of coffee with my friends. It's those core ideas of I'm part of something bigger than me that I've found it a little bit hard. And it's through events like this when I can get some of that Jewish community back into my headspace. And for that, I'm really appreciative. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Bart. That was excellent and really, really interesting. I know, Rabbi Bart, that you do have to log off at some point because you have another commitment, another Tikun Zoom commitment. So you may not be here for the Q&A at the end. If they throw a question to you, I'll take it down and bring it to you afterwards. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful. Thank you very much. And yeah, again, apologies that I will have to disappear soon. But thank you,
Avi. Thanks. Rachelle, we'll hand over to you to introduce our second speaker, please.
Thanks. Our next speaker is Toni Pkoos. We had also a great conversation. The topic that she's speaking about is living life on Zoom, B'Tselem Elokim, body image and Botox. And I have to say, here I am on Zoom with my selfie mirror over my head, so I've got good lighting. So I'm really relating to her topic. And we spoke, when she told me what she was talking about, I was really interested in hearing how the Jewish religion feels about modifying yourself and whether there's any value put in the Torah to make us feel that we should feel a certain way about ourselves and rather than take all society's pressures and go from that. And I was also curious, we were talking about the kind of screening that happens when you go and get a cosmetic procedure. And I was wondering whether there was an ethical imperative on those clinics to make sure the person is doing it in good faith and not affecting their psychological well-being. So Toni is really well versed in this topic because she's completing her PhD in clinical psychology. She's got a focus on the psychological reasons behind seeking cosmetic procedures. And she's also a provisional psychologist with a special interest in body image and obsessive compulsive disorders. I think this is a really topical thing, so I'll leave it to you, Toni. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you so much for that warm introduction and for inviting me to speak tonight. So, Rachelle, I think you touched on why I wanted to talk about body image tonight a bit already. So part of it is because it's my PhD and I've spent the last few years working on it. So it's a topic that's quite close to my heart. But also I think it's particularly important to be discussing and thinking about at the moment, because as you mentioned, right now we're doing this talk on Zoom and I can see my face the whole time that I'm speaking to you guys which is quite different to the way that we usually communicate with other people. So now in this world, we're spending a lot of time on FaceTime, on video calls for the purposes of work and our social life. And what research generally suggests is that when people spend a lot of time looking at their own appearance, whether that's in the mirror, in a reflective surface, or on camera, they start to notice more and more things that they might not like about themselves and that they wish they could change. So I think, you know, in this particular time period, obviously there's lots of physical health issues that we're concerned about. There are lots of concerns about the potential risk of mental health issues as well coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. And I think one of those that deserves a lot of attention is actually body image and the impact that it's going to have on that aspect of our lives. So I'm doing a bit of research on that at the moment, actually. There's a study in the works, so hopefully I'll have some findings about it soon. But when I thought about bringing that into a Tikun Leil talk, I look towards what the Torah tends to say on physical beauty, and it's definitely not a new concept. It's something that's mentioned with all of our matriarchs. So Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, all of them were said that they were beautiful. And that's something that's a notable quality about them. And I also thought about the story of Rachel and Leah. And I remember learning about that when I was younger. And, you know, we learned that Rachel was the beautiful one and Yaakov was immediately attracted to her. And Leah was potentially less beautiful. And so he didn't have that same tendency towards her. So, you know, with promises of the fact that maybe we'll find the husband or we'll find a better relationship, or possibly that we'll do better in our work or in other pursuits, our social pursuits, if we're more physically attractive, it's no wonder that society kind of pushes for those sorts of ideals. And we see that it's something that affects both men and women without a doubt, but a lot of the research has centered particularly on females. And we know that around 90% of women have at least one thing about themselves that they would change if they could. So there's one part of their appearance at least that they don't like. And I actually just saw a research finding today that came out as well that said 45% of young people who completed this survey in America said that they would rather get coronavirus than gain 5 kilos during this crisis. So I thought that was quite interesting to note as well, how powerful these body image issues can be. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the research and the work that I do, but then I'll come back, I guess, to the Jewish perspectives on this issue. So when people begin to develop these body image concerns and dissatisfaction with their appearance, often it's a natural response to look to ways that we can fix that and change that. So one of those ways is cosmetic treatment and actually physically changing the way that we look. And we know that it's becoming hugely popular in Australia and around the world. Australians spend about $1 billion a year on cosmetic procedures. That includes cosmetic surgeries where they might go under anesthetic and they usually have longer recovery periods and more drastic changes are desired. So like a nose job or a breast reduction or something like that. But the most popular type of those procedures are actually minor cosmetic procedures where the risks are not nearly as high. It's things like Botox and dermal fillers, where it's just an injection and they can get a relatively quick change with limited hassle. And for most people, even though it's a physical change that they're looking for, there's often a psychological reason that's driving that. It's for the purpose of improving their self-esteem, improving their confidence, maybe improving their ability to feel comfortable around their romantic partners or in social situations and that sort of thing. So there are often a whole range of psychological reasons that people seek cosmetic treatment. And when we look at the psychological outcomes, generally people report that getting a cosmetic procedure and changing some aspect of themselves does improve their self-esteem slightly. It can improve their self-esteem, it can improve their body image, and generally they tend to be more satisfied with that particular feature that they've changed. But we also know, and this is kind of where my research has centered, that there are a whole range of factors that predict a poor outcome to cosmetic treatment and can sometimes even be harmful for people to get cosmetic procedures if they fit into these categories. So some of those reasons, you know, people who might have quite significant anxiety or depression when they're seeking out the treatment. And that could be that they're looking to get the treatment as a way to change their psychological functioning or change their mood. And the research suggests that doesn't really happen with a cosmetic procedure. That usually takes more work and looking within to be able to work on some of those things. The other factor that's heavily documented in the literature is when people get cosmetic procedures when they're younger as well. And within the cosmetic industry, younger people tend to be below the age of 30 because most people tend to seek out cosmetic procedures above the age of 40 or so. So usually when people are younger, they tend to have higher expectations for what a cosmetic procedure can do for them. And they might hope that this cosmetic procedure is going to be the thing that makes them popular, makes people like them, possibly helps them find a romantic partner. And all of those things, even though it can improve your confidence slightly, which might then affect those things in turn, there's no evidence to suggest that there's a direct link, I guess, between changing your relationship status and getting a cosmetic treatment. The other thing is unrealistic expectations. So if people want to get cosmetic procedures done because it's going to turn them into a supermodel or it's going to make them very attractive, rather than having a more specific goal in terms of looking less tired or looking a bit more rejuvenated, people tend to be dissatisfied when they have these really broad, high expectations for treatment. And the last thing that I spend a lot of time looking into is body dysmorphic disorder as well. And that's kind of at the extreme end of the body image spectrum, but it's a psychiatric condition where people tend to obsess over something that they feel is flawed in their appearance, but other people can't actually see. So it's not a flaw that really exists. And it causes them a lot of distress. Suicide rates are really high in people with body dysmorphic disorder. And often they look to cosmetic treatment as a way to make them feel better about themselves, but it doesn't tend to work so well. So in terms of cosmetic clinics, it's important. A lot of the work that I'm doing is trying to encourage them to get on board in terms of implementing psychological screening and considering that they need to determine, I guess, who's an appropriate candidate for treatment and who's most likely to get the best results. Because sometimes people that have some of those risk factors might not actually do as well from the procedure, and it can be harmful for them. And there have also been cases where they've taken out lawsuits against the practitioner, or potentially there's actually been one case of homicide in America by a person with BDD who ended up murdering their cosmetic surgeon when they were really upset with the results of treatment. So for both the patient and the practitioner, there can be issues involved. So I guess then bringing it back to the Jewish side of things, so that's what a lot of my research looks at. So when I was thinking about Judaism and body image and cosmetic treatment, the first concept that kind of popped into my head was this idea of B'Tselem Elokim, the idea that we've all been created in the image of God. And there are many different aspects of that. So part of it is in terms of our behavior, and that, you know, we should act with kindness and we should carry ourselves in a more spiritual way. We should engage in spiritual pursuits because, you know, we're meant to be like God. But part of that is also about our physical appearance as well, in the sense that God has made us this way for a particular reason. So maybe there are arguments to draw from that about, you know, that we shouldn't necessarily change the way we look. That was the first thought that I guess came to my mind. But at the same time, we're also taught that this body is just a vehicle for us to do spiritual work, I guess, and it's on loan to us while we're in this world. And so we're told that we need to take care of our body because it helps us to do all of those things that we value and things that are important to us. And part of health, maybe I guess in the purest form, we think about that in terms of the physical health of our body, in terms of giving it the food that it needs and exercising and taking care of ourselves and not causing unnecessary harm. But nowadays, I think most people would agree that taking care of our body involves taking care of both the psychological and the physical health of our bodies. And from, you know, the points that I've just mentioned, a lot of people seek out these cosmetic procedures because they're suffering, because they're, well, not always, but it might come from a place of struggle or a place that they're feeling less confident, or they have lower self-esteem. And getting a cosmetic procedure might help in terms of boosting their self-esteem and their psychological functioning. So in those cases, where, you know, the motivation is to improve their quality of life, I think, you know, Judaism would say in that case that it's probably okay if the psychological benefits of getting the procedure outweigh the potential risks that might be involved. You know, on the other hand, when cosmetic treatment is purely for vanity or maybe purely for enhancing your appearance, then it might become a bit more of a contentious issue. But I guess in my experience, that's not generally the case. Usually there's something a little bit deeper than just vanity involved, and there's some psychological reason as well. But I think the main message that I'd like to finish off on, where I think Judaism actually really aligns quite well with the psychological perspective on this issue, is that beauty is more than skin deep. And I think the Torah tells us that as well. So I mentioned at the beginning, it speaks about our matriarchs and how they were physically beautiful, but it also mentions all the other amazing qualities that they had, and how they were kind to others, and how they cared for their families, and what they did for their children and for their community. And it focuses on all the many different traits that they have. And we see that come out in the Ashes Chayil prayer that we say on a Friday night as well, where it describes the woman of valor. And I do apologize that most of what I'm talking about is based on females, because I think all these same principles apply to men as well. But in the Ashes Chayil prayer, it says that, you know, beauty is vain. The more important thing is, like, look what she does for her husband, for her children, look at her wisdom. And it speaks about all of these other amazing qualities of the woman. And I think even though Judaism acknowledges that physical attractiveness is one part of who we are, and so does society, that the emphasis needs to be on, you know, that is just one part. I think society sometimes blows that out of proportion and says, you know, beautiful people get more in life, they're more successful, they have more friends. And really, when you look at the evidence, that's not completely true. But that we need to be able to shift people's self-image to focus on the fact that physical appearance can be one part of that, but there are also other parts of ourselves that we need to cultivate to focus on that inner beauty, which can help to give people a healthier sense of self-esteem that's not just based on external appearances. So I might finish off on that point, but I'm happy to talk a lot more about it, particularly about my research. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has later on.
Thank you so much, Toni. That was fascinating stuff. And I was really interested in a lot of the Jewish parallels to psychology as well. And I'll be one of those to take you up on your offer and maybe engage in further discussion offline. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
So next up we have Rabbanit Lydia Rosenberg. When I chatted with Lydia Rosenberg, I really needed her to explain to me what her speech was going to be about. The topic of it is, where did all the good people go? Chesed in Megillat Ruth. But I had to say to her, look, you know, give me a little bit more so that I can understand what you'll be speaking about. And one of the things we touched upon was that she'd be speaking about communities and leadership and what qualities we look for in our leaders at the moment. And I thought that was so relevant at the moment, as we're all in the place of COVID-19 and we're really looking to our leaders for guidance. In Australia, we've had exceptional guidance. Elsewhere around the world, you can see that people have really struggled based on different leadership values too. So for me, this was really interesting that it's dovetailing with what's happening now as well. To give you some background on Rabbanit Lydia Rosenberg, she's a fellow of Midreshet Matan's Tanakh Educators Program. She also studied at Midreshet Lindenbaum and Midreshet Nishmat. She has an advanced colour teaching certification and a degree in Holocaust Studies from Monash University. Thanks so much, Lydia.
Thank you so much for that and for having me here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be learning with everybody and hearing such fantastic topics and really experiencing something special, I think, is what's happening. So thank you so much. I'm speaking tonight about the Megillah, about the story of Ruth, and going through it a little bit with some context, and particularly looking at the trait of chesed, loving kindness is generally how it's translated, and how we find it and what we can learn from it in the Megillah. So the book of Ruth is written by the prophet Samuel. It's set against the backdrop of Sefer Shoftim, of the book of the judges. Sefer Shoftim comes after Joshua, so after the conquest of Israel, but before the monarchy, before the kings begin. And it's really a unique time in Jewish history. It's characterized by decentralization of leadership and worship, and it's really clear that there are three particular areas that are progressively degenerative throughout the story of the book of Shoftim. Through the social, society breaks down in a tremendously strong and negative way. The leadership and the administrative skills continue to fall apart and break down, and each tribe separates further and further and further from each other, as to end up with tribes warring against each other, as well as a religious degeneration in society. These traits are found also in the book of Ruth. So the book of Ruth, the Megillat Ruth, is set during this time of the judges. And here too, you can see the same issues are cropping up in the beginning. It begins the story with a famine in the land, and the Malbim, a Middle Ages commentator on the book, says that the famine is punishment for the leaders. So the leaders themselves are acting so poorly and so not in the right way that God brings a famine purely to teach them. So we'll begin with the famine, the societal breakdown. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, and the Midrash, one of the earliest commentators we have on the text, tells us that Elimelech was not any man, but rather he was the leader of Beit Lechem, leader of the town. During the famine, he leaves and takes his family and goes to Moab. So straight away, when the going gets tough, he gets going. And there's a religious breakdown too, where Machlon and Kilion, the children of Naomi and Elimelech, marry women from Moab. Marrying women from Moab is not explicitly problematic in terms of it's not a specific commandment not to marry the women of Moab, but there is a commandment not to marry the men of Moab. So one can certainly extrapolate not to intermarry with this community at all. Furthermore, the book is really characterized by an unkindness, a lack of kindness found between the people in the story. Naomi, when she returns with Ruth after, as Avi spoke about, Ruth's conversion and following her back to Beit Lechem, she gets back there and people treat her in a horrible way. They make fun of her. They say, we can't believe this used to be Naomi. She looks so beautiful. She used to be so rich and now she's nothing and she looks so terrible. And they make fun of her. They don't look after her and they don't look after Ruth. And Ruth has to demean herself and go and beg, essentially, and take whatever she can find in the fields left after the laborers have already been through. This is the context, really, of the book of Ruth. This is where the story begins, that we have this society that has so many issues and so many problems, and that really comes down to the people are not treating each other the way they are supposed to be treated on any level. The leaders are not looking after their people. In a religious sense, no one is looking out for each other. And in a societal sense, everybody is happy to let their neighbor suffer. So with this in mind, it's really Ruth's act of chesed, of kindness, become all the more staggering to us when we really examine what she does. First, as Avi mentioned, that Ruth, although not explicit in the text, the Midrash tells us that she was a princess. If she's a princess, or perhaps just someone of great importance, her leaving of Moab to follow Naomi is that much greater. She leaves everything behind, any chance at a future in her own country where she knows the culture, where she has her own extended family, and follows this woman, her mother-in-law, and follows her into Israel. That is an incredible kindness, to not leave Naomi all alone in the world. Ruth also goes and begs, picks up the wheat, following the laws of the wheat fields. After a bundle of wheat has fallen, you're not allowed to pick it up and carry it home. You have to leave it there for the beggars. So it's very clear who's begging and who needs help in this society. And Ruth gets down there and gets it all for Naomi because Naomi can't go herself. She listens to Naomi over and over again and as Naomi mentions to her and tells her explicitly to go and put herself in front of Boaz, she goes. And as well as that, she actually ends up marrying Boaz, which really sounds like a happy ending because she gets married in the end. But she didn't have to marry Boaz. She could have married anybody in Beit Lechem she chose. But the fact that she married a relative of Naomi means that she was marrying within that family for that family's sake. And their first child, the son that Boaz and Ruth have, they give to Naomi. They give to her as Naomi's gift, as a thank you, but as a piece of family for Naomi to have again after the loss of her own children. And these acts of kindness are not only incredible, but they are self-sacrificing for Ruth. These are acts which you could even argue are self-sabotaging for her. In every point where she can choose to do something that may better her life, she chooses not to, and she chooses to follow on with Naomi and do what's good for her. This is a very unique type of chesed, and it's not one that God asks of the Jewish people. So why then is this chesed so heavily emphasized in this story? The Midrash and Ruth Rabbah asks us the question, why was this book written at all? Or really meaning, why was this book codified in the Tanakh? What do we need to take from here? And Rabbi Zera answers for us, and he says, it's to show how good the reward is for those who do kindness. So where in the book is this kindness shown? Where is the reward? It ends with the words and the genealogy of David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the grandson of Ruth. Her kindness, her incredible self-sacrificing kindness, gives her David. This kind of chesed that ends up being passed down through the lines of Ruth's family is not the type of chesed that God asks from us, but it is the type of chesed that we ask from our leaders, to self-sabotage their own best interests in order for the betterment of society, to sacrifice everything that they can in order to give to everybody else. And this is the key point when we're going to try in advance to combat the potential corruption of kings. For kings, for leaders everywhere, but especially for kings who are not accountable to anyone except in the Tanakh, to God and to the Navi, the desire to do what's good for you is so strong. But when we have a line of kings born from this union of two such altruistic characters, we begin this monarchy with the hope for these altruistic kings. And although not all the kings were, I would even say, self-sacrificing, let alone altruistic, it seems to be that David HaMelech's monarchy and the kings of Yehudah are more successful, relatively speaking, than the northern tribes. And the northern kings from the northern tribes don't come from the same line. And perhaps this type of chesed is so strong in the genes that it can manifest itself time and time again with different kings at perhaps moments, but for some of them, for all their kingship, with their ability to do what's best for others at their own expense, at the cost of their own happiness. The Zohar Chadash, another midrashic source, an early source, tells us to read the Megillah as the background to the monarchy, as the background to the understanding, not our own chesed, but what we need to demand from our leadership in order to build a society that together we can function, that we can all trust our leader to be looking out for us so that we can do those smaller acts of chesed, so that we don't have to be selfish, so that we can help each other. And especially during this time, it's really, I've seen so many amazing things of people doing incredible things for each other, for the community. And it really does make me think of what amazing chesed you can see all around you when we have, thank God, a leadership that is looking after us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit. That was extremely insightful. I'll never be looking at Ruth and King David the same. And I'm sure anyone who's in a leadership position is going to take your words to heart and start thinking what more we can all do individually and collectively to help the people who depend on us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So last but not least is our Rabbi Yaakov Glassman. The topic he's speaking on today is organ donation in a nutshell. What does Jewish law have to say? And I'm very interested in everything Rabbi Glassman has to say. Part of his bio is that he's, of course, the senior rabbi of St Kilda Shule and serves as president of the Rabbinical Association of Australia and New Zealand. As we all know, he's a highly sought after speaker in both Jewish audiences and the wider audience. And I'm presuming that all of you have had the chance to hear his sermons at Shul. I know that I came to St Kilda Shul for a variety of reasons, but I've stayed so much because of Rabbi Glassman. His sermons are inspiring, they're insightful, they leave me thinking about them for weeks afterwards. And I really feel like my involvement there and listening to him, just listening to him, has made me a better Jew and a better person. So I'm really excited to hear about this topic. I think it is something that makes me feel is how Judaism is. We're so willing to talk about new and progressive topics, and this is one of them. So I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Rachelle, for that very, very generous introduction, none of which, dare I say, I wrote, so I appreciate that. Organ donation is a very challenging topic for many people, and for good reason. And there was a billionaire in Brazil who about 6 or 7 years ago pulled off a massive publicity stunt. He owned a $400,000 Bentley car, and he told the media that he was going to bury the car in his backyard after he died. And this set off a massive media frenzy and communal outrage that a person would take something that valuable and rather than sell it and donate the proceeds to charity, or at least inherit it or bequeath it to his next of kin, he would just bury it in the ground, which does absolutely nothing. And he told the media that he's going to give a press conference in a few days' time to explain his actions. And of course, in those few days, everyone in the whole country and the whole Europe were talking about it, and South America and everywhere were talking about it. And finally, the big day comes and he gets in front of the cameras and says, now that I've got the attention of millions, I want you to know that I never had any intention of burying my Bentley, but I just wanted to communicate to you the message through this stunt that if you think burying a Bentley in a ground, a beautiful car in a ground, is a waste of a resource and an asset, how about when everyone dies, not having registered their organs to be donated to someone else? That is a much greater travesty and a much greater loss of an asset that could have been used to save somebody's life. And after he came out with that, the organ donation registry in Brazil and the surrounding countries shot up many, many fold, and he was seen as a hero thereafter in the organ donor community. And I think that really raised the ante on it. So I thought to myself, I would love to be able to pull off that stunt too. So if anyone wants to donate a Bentley to me, you are welcome to do it, and I'll make sure to pull off that stunt. But on a serious note, organ donation, in theory, is a profound mitzvah, a positive obligation of pikuach nefesh, which means to save lives. The sober reality is that if someone is, God forbid, in a position that they're capable of donating organs, they are generally young or healthy, and for whatever reason, they've died prematurely or they've died in their time, their organs are still able to go into someone else's body and help that person live many more years. And that being the case, it actually surprises me why in Australia the organ donor rate is so low. And perhaps it has something to do with religious sensitivities or traditional sensitivities in what's predominantly a Christian country. But from a Jewish perspective, when people say Judaism or Jewish law opposes organ donation, they are in fact wrong. That is an unfounded statement. Rather, Jewish law views this concept with a great degree of complexity and nuance. And the reason is because even though pikuach nefesh, saving a life, is of paramount importance, it's central, it's the very reason shuls have not been operating for the last 2 months, it's the very reason the Sydney Beth Din closed down the shuls in New South Wales 2 weeks before the government did, because they wanted to save lives and they understood the highly contagious and infectious nature of this disease. It's the reason that comes behind so much of what we do, our willingness and our obligation, for example, to desecrate the Shabbat in order to save a life, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, saving lives is only commanded and indeed required if it doesn't transgress one of three particular other commandments. So of all of the 613, 610 are trumped because of pikuach nefesh. We break Shabbat to save a life. We eat non-kosher to save a life. We do all of those things. But one of very small subset of laws which we do not do in order to save a life is to take someone else's life. Which means that if someone points the gun at my head and says, Yaakov, it's you or you got to kill that innocent person, one of you's going, I'm halachically obligated to forfeit my own life rather than take someone else's life, an innocent life. I am allowed to kill that person in self-defense, but not an innocent life. That being the case, what is wrong with organ donation? Organ donation is a mitzvah only if the organs of the person, of the donor, are extracted from his or her body after that person is dead. But if the organ is extracted whilst the person is alive, and we're usually talking about a vital organ, then the extraction process will be the catalyst that kills that person. So the critical question therefore becomes, from a Jewish legal perspective, what defines death? When is death occurring? So pre the time of respirator, organ donation was virtually non-existent, because by the time the body shut down and the person was obviously dead, the organs were deoxygenated and therefore they were of no value to anyone who would receive them. But once modern technology and science and medicine advancements gave us the miracle of a respirator, that means the body can remain oxygenated even after the person is brain dead or cardiac dead. So the question then becomes, what is the definition of death? At what point in the person's regression from living to dying have they crossed that line at which we can say they are now dead and we are allowed to extract the organs whilst they're still oxygenated? That is the key question which the halachic authorities ask. And the reason it's such an important question is because the definition of death as prescribed in Jewish law may differ quite significantly from the legal or medical definition of death in Australia or any other country. So I'm going to leave aside the definition of death in Australia, because ultimately, if someone is wanting to donate their organs in accordance with Jewish law, what matters is not necessarily the Australian law. Obviously, we have to abide by that as well. But more importantly, in this context, what does Jewish law have to say? And the halachic, major halachic opinions are divided on this matter into two camps. For those who are well versed in Jewish legal works, the following names will mean a lot to you. For those who are not, take it from me, they mean a lot. These are the big guns. These are serious rabbis. They are the rabbis of other rabbis. They are not just rabbis like myself who just, get up and crack a few jokes about our football team and try and give as best a sermon as possible. These are serious authorities. Their names include, on the one side of the divide, we have Reb Moshe Feinstein, Reb Ovadia Yosef, Reb Shlomo Amar, Reb Moshe Sternbuch, and Reb Mordechai Eliyahu. On the other side of the divide, we have rabbis, giants, the likes of Yehuda Eliezer Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, Reb Yosef Shalom Eliashiv, Reb Shmuel Vosner, and Reb Shnezalman Auerbach. What were they arguing about? What are they arguing about? One school of thought, the first school of thought, says that the moment of death, according to Jewish law, is brain dead. When a person is brain dead, that's when they are halachically dead and you can extract organs thereafter. The other opinion says that that is too early. That is too early in the process. We have to wait until cardiac death, until the heart stops beating and circulating blood around the body. But that step occurs sometime after brain death. What that means practically is as follows. According to opinions that assert cardiac death, you have to wait all the way until the heart stops beating and the blood stops circulating. According to that opinion, very few organs can be salvaged after that point, because by that point, the organs are no longer oxygenated. But if someone adopts the first opinion, which is brain dead, then between the time the brain dies and the time there's no more oxygen going to the vital organs, there's a lot that can be done. And this is where the divide stands. So the most important thing, when someone asks me the question, they say, Rabbi, is it permitted to donate organs? I always respond with the same response. It is permitted. It is a mitzvah, but it is absolutely critical that it be done in direct consultation with leading rabbinic figures who are trained in this area. In Australia, we are blessed with the Sydney Beth Din, whose dayanim, whose rabbis are equipped in this area. The Melbourne Beth Din, not so much, but the Sydney Beth Din have published a position paper on this, submitted that to the government, and they have actually successfully overseen organ donations from members of the Jewish community. There was a woman, I believe from Melbourne, Mary Laffner, who, and I'm allowed to say her name because her story was published in the Australian Jewish News with permission of her family, who died of a stroke. She desperately wanted to be an organ donor. She had communicated that to her family. The family contacted the Sydney Beth Din. The Sydney Beth Din worked together with the medical team in the organ donor department, and she successfully gave up her organs for successful transplantation into various recipients. She saved her life in her final act of chesed and altruism in this world. And it was a remarkable story. And I know members in our own congregation who have been recipients of organs, who have lived many fruitful, nachas-filled years spent with their family and children because they were able to be recipients of this. So I tell people it is absolutely a yes. It is possible, and it is a mitzvah. I myself have indicated to my family that I wish to be an organ donor. I hope to keep my organs till a ripe old age, but should God have other plans, that is what I'd like to do with my organs. I don't want them going underground with me. I want them to save lives. But in order to do so, my family knows that the first call they're going to make when they're approached by the organ donor team, by the hospital or whoever, is, would you like your relatives' organs to be donated? They're going to say yes, but we first need to contact the Sydney Beth Din. And they will have a hotline around the clock, and we'll be able to make sure they are highly trained. They understand the medical implications. They understand the technology. They understand the terminology, and they are able to work together with the hospital in order to see it to fruition. So in a nutshell, there are two opinions, just by some way of summation. There are two opinions as to when death occurs. I personally follow the ruling of the opinion that says brain death, because that means it's earlier on. They are definitely broad shoulders to be able to rely upon. And it means that it's at an earlier stage where the organs are still oxygenated and can be highly effective in transplantation. But as I say to everyone, the two most important steps, if you really want to be an organ donor, is number one, you must tell your family about it. They need to know about it. It's an uncomfortable conversation. If you're sitting around the Shabbat table and you're talking about stuff, it's not easy to talk about what would happen if, God forbid, something happened. But we need to talk about it, because otherwise there's no way of communicating your wishes. And if a person, God forbid, ends up in a situation where they can become potentially an organ donor, they're not in a position to answer any questions and give consent to anything. So the consent and the communication of one's wishes must be done to the family, to one's next of kin, whilst we're among the living. And the second point is that our families need to be made aware, critically made aware, that they need to contact a competent rabbi. And if you can't get through to the Sydney Beth Din straight away, contact your local congregational rabbi, because he will know how to contact them. He will not take the case upon himself, but he'll have the contacts to be able to get through to the Sydney Beth Din. And every single rabbi in the country knows full well that they are experts in this area. So in conclusion, I do encourage organ donation. I do believe it is a big mitzvah. But at the same time, I emphasize, and I'm at pains to emphasize, that it must be done, or it should be done, in accordance with halakha, which means it's not just doing it through Donate Life Australia. Donate Life can be of assistance, but it must be done with the input and under the supervision of competent, qualified halachic authorities, predominantly the Sydney Beth Din. And in doing so, we will be able to bring continued joy to another family, even though that is reaped from the seeds of sadness and grief from the family of the donor. So that's all I have to say on this particular topic. If anyone wants to hear more, this Friday, Shavuot, is the first service we're having in 2 months. I haven't given a sermon in 2 months, so I've just built it all up. It will be about 6 hours long. You're all welcome to come to my sermon, and then you'll be able to wear off the cheesecake that you ate the night before. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm not sure if everyone has had access to their chat screens. I've had one question come in for Toni. That was from Rabbi Harold, that's from almost like a rabbi, President Harold Sternfeld. He wanted to know what Toni feels like about tattoos in compared to cosmetic surgery. Do they fall under a different umbrella?
Mm-hmm. I usually get asked the question about tattoos whenever I talk about my research, and it's not something that I've specifically focused on. There are types of tattoos that are definitely cosmetic in nature, like cosmetic tattooing is a whole branch where people might get their eyebrows tattooed on and things like that. But tattoos for artwork purposes, there are definitely like psychological reasons that people might choose to get a tattoo. But I think the reasons tend to be a lot more varied than you see with other sorts of cosmetic procedures. Like people might do tattoos for a reason of personal significance with family and that sort of thing. So I think as far as I'm aware, it's not as clear cut. If we're talking about the risk factors for a poor outcome, is that kind of what the question's in relation to with tattoos?
Maybe if it falls into the same category too, if it's also considered something that where you're questioning whether it's about how you feel about yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
It falls into that range, I think.
Sorry, what was that last bit that you said?
It falls into that range of, you know, the whole, I need to change myself. This will make me feel better.
Mm-hmm. I think it does for some people. I think that there are some people who might get tattoos for that purpose. Maybe they even get them to cover up another part of their body that they don't particularly like, and having that tattoo makes them feel better about it as well. But yeah, I think the reasons tend to be a little bit more varied for tattoos, so it's not as clear cut. And
I wanted to ask this of you too. What do you find has a better outcome? Is it people who have successful cosmetic surgery, or is it people who are able to shift their perspective on how they look themselves, how they feel about themselves?
Definitely in terms of the longevity of outcome, being able to shift your perspective tends to work better. Particularly when we talk about things like Botox, when, you know, they wear off after a few months. So if Botox is where you're deriving your self-esteem from, it's something that you need to keep up. And that can obviously be stressful for people to have to manage that. Whereas working on the psychological aspects of body image you can develop principles that you can apply kind of more consistently over your life. And I guess that's the general approach that we would take, that cosmetic treatment can help with those like kind of immediate boosts in self-esteem. But if you want that longer term change, psychological treatment's probably the way to go in terms of body image.
Right. And I think actually on that topic, somebody wanted to ask Rabbi Glassman, what's wrong with Botox? Is there anything that would be considered wrong in Jewish, religion with something like that?
That's an excellent question. I will refer to what Toni said earlier in her talk, that it really depends on the subjective mindset of the individual. If the person is doing so or is seeking to do so because of a genuine psychological need, and he or she has properly discussed it with a medical practitioner and has kind of got the green light from that perspective, then there is certainly permissibility in doing so, because what it's doing is alleviating a sense of suffering or a sense of stigma within that person's mind. If, on the other hand, the person is fully cognizant of a fact that he or she may be perfectly normal looking, good looking, there's no real issues, and it's really just pursuing vanity for vanity's sake, then it's certainly something that Judaism would frown upon.
And while we're still on the topic, I'm interested in finding out from either of you as well. Toni and I were talking about how people might go and get, let's say, lip filler at a place, and they'll ask for more and more and more, and will want to look distorted, but the person doing it will want to do what the client says. Is there an imperative, an ethical imperative in the Jewish law to stop, to impose some kind of, cease, don't do this anymore, and do what's best for the patient, or rather just adhere to what they want?
Well, for the benefit of the males, can you define what lip filler is?
I think it's Toni, an injectable where you would plump up your lips. It's not permanent, but it can change the way your lip shape looks.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect explanation.
Toni, do you want to? I mean, I would just go back to the same principle about distinguishing between the psychological state of the individual and vanity. Those are really the two very different kind of motivations that I can think of.
Okay.
I would also say on that point that there are guidelines for medical practitioners who carry out these procedures, that they have to abide by their duty of care, and they have ethical responsibilities to the patient as well. So in a situation where they actually don't feel like cosmetic treatment's the right option, they shouldn't be carrying out the procedure, or there are kind of rules around upselling as well, to be careful about upselling those treatments. And I think, if they have guidelines for medical practitioners, then Judaism would probably say that, the practitioners that should be abiding by those guidelines as well. Would that be right, Rabbi Glassman?
I think so, absolutely, yeah. And as a general rule, when it comes to things to do with medicine, it is important to refer to medical experts in those areas as a general rule.
Rabbi, I've got a question for you based on organ donation. It's a two-part question. Number one, blood is not officially an organ, it's a tissue, but is blood donation permitted despite the donor obviously being alive? And I don't know if you want to hear the second part as well. Secondly, there might be advantages to having a living related donor in kidney transplants. Is that okay, also given that the donor is alive?
Great question. There is a fundamental and critical difference between cadaveric organ donation, where the person's dead, and live organ donation. Live organ donation, including blood and plasma, is 100% permissible. It's a huge mitzvah. I personally led a whole group of rabbis in the Rabbinical Council on a blood drive, and we had a whole publicity thing to try and get people involved. So regular blood donations is a massive mitzvah that one can do in this world to help, as well as plasma, and also kidneys, provided someone can function healthy after that as well. So if one's got sort of a kidney that's not so good and you want to give the fresh one, then it becomes problematic. But otherwise, the thumbs up for living organ donation.
And somebody actually just wrote in, Alana Doe, that she had a blood transfusion that saved her life. I'll address the next one to Lydia first, even though it's for everyone. But it was an anonymous question, but wanting to ask each speaker, what's the most meaningful or significant part of Judaism for you? So Rabbi Nish, I might start with you.
Okay. I can't pick a thing. I find meaning in a lot of areas, in so much in the ritual. So much of the ritual adds a tremendous beauty and happiness to me. I find so much meaning and joy when my son comes home singing songs about the Chagim, and when he asks me questions. I don't think I can pull just one thing away more than anything else. It's about the whole thing, the whole outlook, the whole experience, the whole my whole world in that way is all meaningful and is all beautiful with challenges, of course, many challenges. But I think my answer is the opposite, is not one thing, but the collective, the full living of it is the most meaningful.
Did anyone else wanted to answer that question as well?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think for me, like there are some rituals which I really value and I really connect to, but I think it's more of the sense of community. And the thing that I've always loved about Judaism is you can go anywhere in the world, and if you meet another Jewish person, or if you go to a shul in the middle of Europe or in the middle of somewhere random, you immediately have a connection to the people around you. Even if you practice Judaism in different ways, there's that shared bond. And I think that that's something really special that even with our like physical distance at the moment, people have been able to keep up that sense of community in really creative ways, which I think has been really special.
And Rabbi Glassman, I've got another question for you. Can a Jew refuse post-mortem examination on religious grounds?
That's a great question. Autopsies are...
Sorry, that was Adrian Clifford.
Sorry? Yeah, I know. Dr. Adrian Clifford, one of our valued long-standing members, and a great question from a doctor. I'm going to try and sound as medical as I can. The answer is it depends on the purpose of the post-mortem. Autopsies are generally, under normal circumstances, not permitted because the sanctity that is afforded to the body of the deceased person is unparalleled. We treat the body with enormous respect. It's for that reason that there should be someone on guard with the body all the way from the point of passing until burial. It's why the Chevra Kadisha will actually hire someone to live in the house where the body is, and to ensure that the body is not left alone at any point. It's the reason why I recall that at a funeral that I once went to, they were going to place the coffin onto the little trolley that carries it, and someone had accidentally left a chumash or a Jewish book on it, which ordinarily has to be treated with respect, and they knocked off the chumash onto the floor in order to put the body there because no one had a spare hand to hold the chumash. So these are all illustrative of the sanctity of the body after death. We don't interfere with it unnecessarily. However, it is permitted and probably even mandated if the person who died without a known cause. So if it wasn't old age or it wasn't disease and we don't know what caused it, it becomes important to do an autopsy in order to determine whether that person carries a genetic disease or a genetic condition. Because if they do have a genetic condition and that is not sourced, then God forbid that could occur to that person's family member, to their children, to their siblings. And therefore, in order to rule out the possibility of a genetic disease, we have to do an autopsy. And of course, if the autopsy is done and a genetic disease is identified, then we can inform the family and they can take the necessary steps to get screened, to get checked, and to take the precautions needed to stay safe. However, donating a body for sort of longer term goals, such as science and research, is not permitted. So dissection of the body is permitted for the immediate term, namely to save the life through organ donation or to determine whether there's an immediate genetic disease, but not for the purpose of research. And the screen just popped up in chat. Is it allowed? What about murder? If someone was murdered, the reality is that we live in Australia, and it's quite probable that in the case of murder, God forbid, the authorities are going to want to do an autopsy. So generally speaking, the Chevra Kadisha and the rabbis would try to argue against it if it was clear that it was murder. But if it's needed for purposes of ballistics or whatever evidence is required for a court process, then generally it is allowed in order that justice is able to be served.
I actually am curious as well, just because it's a related topic. How does Judaism feel about, I guess, on the one extreme, the assisted dying legislation that got introduced last year, where people can hasten their death or even if somebody's terminally ill in a hospital and the medical staff say, we'd like to stop feeding them or extubate them or whatever it is, that will also hasten their death.
Wow. You got a few hours? No, I'm just kidding. All right. I'm gonna try and summarize it into about 60 seconds. And I'm just going to thank Rabbi Avi Bart after this, because the other rabbinic guy sort of abandoned us. But Liddy, if you want to have a go at this one after, you're most welcome to as well from your research in this area. So in short, the answer is the answer very much relates to Rachelle, can you just remind me what the question was? Because as I was talking to Lydia, I've forgotten it entirely. Just one word.
I guess hastening somebody's death.
That's right. Euthanasia or assisted dying, there's two types in which could it occur. It's active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. Active euthanasia means, as it's actually done, ingesting a pill or ingesting a poison to cause the death. That is categorically prohibited according to all opinions, even if there's great suffering. We never allow that to actually cause a person's, to hasten one's own death by injecting a pill or a poison or an injection or lethal injection, anything like that. Passive euthanasia, on the other hand, means the person is fundamentally dead already. The only thing keeping them alive is a respirator. By removing the respirator or switching off the machine, one is not actively causing death, but rather it's a double negative. They are removing the impediment to death. The person is fundamentally dead. There is a machine that is impeding that person's death, and by switching it off, you're removing the negatives. So two negatives make the outcome, the positive outcome of the person dying, but that in certain circumstances can be permitted. But when it comes to these very touchy issues, one definitely ought to consult a very competent rabbi. I've just given you the headline response.
Yeah. And I guess I have one more question for Lydia as well, which was for Rabbanit. It was whether in the story that she was talking about, was it the kindness of Naomi or the kindness of kind of the leaders that stood out more? Sorry, of Ruth, or the kindness of the leaders that stood out more? Because she touched both on the things that the people do, but also the kindness that the leaders do.
I think that in the story, in the Megillah, there's no question that Ruth's kindness is outstanding in all the way that she acts and the actions that she undertakes on behalf of Naomi. But the actions and the kindness of the leaders in the following books in Tanakh, in the Davidic line, in the books of Shmuel and in the books of Melachim, there you will find really amazing acts of kindness coming, I think, stemming from Ruth. And it's really a kindness that comes all the way from Abraham, who is known as a Baal Chesed, as he's the embodiment of Chesed. And so it's really a part, it's supposed to be a part of everything and of everybody all the time, and it gets lost somewhere along the way, and Ruth brings it back for us.
Yeah, great. Well, that's all the questions I've had sent to me.
So Rachelle, I know that you've been very gracious in thanking everyone else and all of the speakers, and I would echo those thanks to Rabbi Bart in his absence, and also to Toni and Rabbanit Lydia for your very insightful talks. But I also wanted to thank you, Rachelle, because the MC probably has the most important role as the glue that keeps things going, and you've emceed so many of our events and our programs, and you do a really great job in sort of researching as much as possible. Ordinarily, you've only got one topic to research. This time you had 4, so that sort of quadrupled your workload, and I thank you very much. And finally, I just wanted to thank very much on behalf of our shul, all of you who have participated. It was really wonderful to see so many faces, or to see so many names on a screen to join us for tonight. It was a very insightful evening, and I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach. Enjoy Yom Tov, enjoy the food, enjoy the dairy, enjoy the cheesecake. Little plug for Glicks. That's the family business. Glicks makes the best cheese. No, I'm just kidding. So thank you all so much for all of that. And I very, very much look forward to the time that we're able to congregate again in the healthy and safe circumstances together as social beings. Human beings are social beings, and to be able to share and enjoy each other's company in real time for next year's Tikun Leil Shavuot program. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night and a Chag Sameach to you all.
Shkoyach.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Chag Sameach.